Got 1, 2, 3. Chris? 4?
Notice you never ask questions. Where ranked.
Yeah, that's very intentional. All right. Thank you for being here this afternoon. It is 3-ish on a Friday, so my goal will be to be pretty brief. First, I wanted to provide a few comments on the budget coming out of the House today. I know that Representative Rudy and others put a lot of work into it. We should all be appreciative of that. Overall, with one exception, which I'll talk about in a minute, I believe that their version of the budget is fiscally responsible. It is built very similarly to the budget that I proposed. Most of the same fund transfers. While I would like to see more new revenue, there is some new revenue in it. And the same debt ratio, meaning more debt will come off the books over the next 2 years than go on to it. The budget also, at least as passed by the House, puts new dollars into some priority areas that we set out. It puts at least several $100 million new dollars into public education. It hires 100 new social workers. It puts significant dollars into Medicaid and expanded Medicaid. And so there are a lot of good pieces in this budget. The other thing that we need to make sure we give credit for is it does not make the type of devastating cuts that we have seen in budgets in the last 14 years. And for that, we all ought to be supportive of at least that piece. Overall, I think compared to the last 14 years, the House version is a good version. Now, I think it could be better, and we are certainly going to work to try to get some things back in to the budget that would make it better. The first piece is the teacher raise. The teacher raise that we proposed was $2,000. Obviously, that is significantly lower in this budget. While we appreciate there is a teacher raise, we have a teacher shortage and a teacher crisis occurring not just in Kentucky, but around the country. And with other states offering $2,000 raises, we are at a competitive disadvantage if we do not do it. Point 2 is an underfunding of the teacher retirement in the form of not having dollars for health care for the second year of the budget for our teachers under 65. I understand that there is a part in the budget to where if we have extra dollars, it fills that hole, and that was able to fill the hole in the last budget. But I believe that we ought to be accounting for every single one of those dollars, and we'll be pushing to get that in. Also, there is less overall dollars on public education. We'll continue pushing. That's textbooks and other issues. Third piece is that there are fewer social workers than we'd like to see. We are number 1 in abuse and neglect, and my goal was to make the major one-time investment to try to make sure that was never the case again. With 350 new social workers, I could guarantee that we wouldn't be number 1 in abuse and neglect again. I will do my very best with 100 new social workers. I just want to make sure that we can protect our kids. Next, and perhaps from the financial standpoint, the most concerning piece is the removal of any general funds for the Kentucky Wired project. This is not my project. I don't have any personal investment in it. But the lack of any dollars going into it will cause a default on the contract, no question. In fact, we've already had a call from a bond rating agency, which raises significant concerns. The default would cost the Kentucky nearly $400 to $600 million. So this is a project that's 80-something% complete, that the costs have stabilized, and that we believe that we will in fact get some income coming in. And right now, to abandon it by not putting about $35 million in the budget at a cost of $400 to $600 million, that's $500 million plus, I just don't think financially responsible. Like or dislike the project, we are where we are. Our only option, our only responsible option, is to provide this funding in the budget. Next piece is the budget did not include the increase in the CLEP fund. We'd added about $600 a year for police and for firefighters at a time when we are struggling to make sure that we can recruit for our sheriff's offices and for our city police. It's about $50 extra a month for those folks. Next piece, saddened that there was no funding for the Commission on Women. This is a $40 billion plus budget, about a $48 billion budget. And to not be able to find $375,000 for the Commission on Women is really unfortunate, and my hope is that it will be included at a later time. A couple of smaller things in there. There is a limitation on the amount that the Commonwealth Office of Technology can charge for its services to other executive branch agencies, limiting it to the charges from this last year. That's something that we're really going to have to look at in our flexibility to actually operate the executive branch from inside the executive branch. We also have new cybersecurity requirements that we're going to have to invest in, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to generate and use funds all within the executive branch to do that. Another interesting piece of the budget is in the past, all constitutional offices have been treated the same. This time we have increases in, I think, the Attorney General's office and in the Auditor's office, and we have a cut to the Governor's office. We'd just like to see all of those things somewhat more even. And the final note on the budget is it attempts to make the Attorney General the final arbiter of issues inside the budget. The budget is a law. The final arbiter is a judge. That's just the way the separation of powers works. And while we're not going to spend a lot of time on that piece, just something that I think we could have done without inside the budget. So again, I want to go back to the top line in that this is one of the better budgets we've seen in the last 14 years. It makes no devastating cuts. With the exception of the Kentucky Wired issue, it is fiscally responsible, and it does put new dollars into areas that are a priority of mine. And for that, I hope that the House negotiates very strongly for those priorities when it comes to working with the Senate. I'm going to continue to try to push to do more of the good things that the House included, but I'm appreciative of the way their budget came out. Just a couple other pieces of news. I believe next week we ought to be live on the website that'll show all Kentuckians where the state plane goes, who is on it, and the reasons why. I wanted this up a little bit earlier, but as you all know, we've been a little busy. And this budget session is a busy one. Once they're complete, I'm once again going to release my tax returns, which I did every year as Attorney General. I'm going to do it again this year. They are going to be just as boring as they were last year. And finally, as of the last piece of information I have, which is as of this morning, we still have no confirmed cases of coronavirus in Kentucky. I'm happy to talk about that more if you'd like. There aren't any major updates other than the president signing the appropriation that has gone through Congress. That's about $8 billion. It's very, very important to the states, and we're happy that that happened. All right.
Governor, Kentucky would be getting, what, 7 or 8 million out of that from the coronavirus?
We think that that number is about right directly, but there are a lot of ways that we can benefit and potentially get dollars indirectly. A lot goes to the CDC, which then has the ability to move money in different ways. So right now, we believe that this has been a reasonable response, but I will say that the coronavirus changes, or at least evolves every day in how we are responding to it, and may even change what it's going to take to respond to it. The dollars that it can take on a given day, you can believe are going up or possibly going down. For instance, once private labs are up and running, those tests will be covered by your insurance. And so we will see more tests being done because of that, but a potential smaller cost to the state. Now, we want to make sure that ultimately if there is a reason, and there needs to be a real reason for somebody to be tested, they can. And the way the CDC guidelines are changing, we're going to see lots more tests. That doesn't mean we're at any more risk. It just means it's going to become much more widespread available. And we'll probably learn more about the virus at that point. You know, there are some who think that there is a more moderate strain that's out there that's not being diagnosed. We would find that in the testing. If it is, then we'll have to evolve in our approach, but it would mean a couple different things. If that is the case, then the mortality rate is much lower than we currently believe that it is too. So this is an evolving situation that we are working to be on top of every day.
What does the budget bill do about the Attorney General giving him authority to arbitrate, I guess?
It says the final decision maker on any disagreements on what's in the budget or what it means is the Attorney General. In the last budget, it was the Finance Cabinet Secretary. But while I think the change should be noted because I want to create a tone in Frankfurt where we're not doing some of these silly things. You know, under the law, the final decision maker on any bill is the courts, and so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on something that ultimately isn't going to be meaningful under the law. Yes.
Governor, we've received a few calls about people claiming there were 2 people being tested in UK. Is there any comment on that, or is there any news on it?
Well, what right now, I believe the last firm number that we can give you that we've had tested in Kentucky is 10. And now we have 7 negative results. So we have more results that have come back, all come back negative, with 3 tests pending. All these folks are low risk. We don't anticipate them coming back positive. But just let me say, as we see this coming around the coming around the country, we should expect a positive test in the future in Kentucky. And that doesn't mean we ought to panic. It does mean that we may take some extra steps in the Commonwealth, but it's all about being prepared. So on that note, let me mention that spring break is coming up soon. I would highly encourage anybody who has plans to visit any of the countries that we have seen the outbreaks in to cancel those plans. With how this is growing around the world, it's even if you're going to lose a few dollars on it, let's be smart about it. Other thing is almost every death that we've seen in the United States has been a medically fragile senior. So to our Kentuckians who have parents and grandparents, especially in nursing home facilities, assisted living, if you're sick or if your kids are sick, make sure you're not taking them to see those parents and grandparents. Let's make sure that we think about our own health, not just in not going to work, but in not exposing those that might be at a higher risk of greater harm if they contracted it.
Governor, the teacher raise is smaller than what you had promised on the campaign trail, but you on the campaign trail didn't promise raises to all state employees or all school employees, as the House budget has. Is there a trade-off for you? Are you willing to concede that maybe all school employees deserve these raises as well?
Well, my budget had state employee raises in them, and what we did is we provided a $2,000 teacher raise because if we really want to address a teacher crisis, which we need to address it in a way that'll work. And if every other state is offering something like this, we need to be offering it too. In the private sector, you'd call that being competitive. So I think it's the right thing to do in the public sector. Now, on top of our teacher raises, my proposed budget also had a SEEK increase. This SEEK increase in in the House's version is all the raises going into it. So we had the teacher raise plus the SEEK increase. And what we had suggested is that we wanted superintendents to look at using that SEEK increase to provide raises to others. But listen, we have hardworking folks throughout our schools that aren't teachers. I think they do amazing work. I think they deserve a raise. I just want to make sure we address this teacher crisis.
If the $2,000 is not in the final budget, budget? Can you line item that, or would you line item veto that?
Oh, if there is a raise for teachers, then of course I wouldn't line item it, because I want to make sure that they do get a raise. There's no way to write in a larger raise. What I can say is that I will continue to advocate for it. And this is an example of being overall pleased with what I've seen out of the House. It does have a raise for teachers. I just believe to be effective, it needs to be a little bit larger. So we appreciate their work, but we're going to continue to push for the areas that we wanted invested in and that they invested in. We're just looking at a higher level.
One of the things that was discussed a lot on the House floor today was this group at the University of Louisville, the law school group, the Ordered Liberty Fellowship. And, you know, a lot of the Democrats are saying that this is a fringe group, you know, that they'll feed people straight into the Federalist Society. Do you have any thoughts on this group and the fact that they're getting funding?
I don't have thoughts on the specific group, but I have never seen a particular organization in a particular law school get funding directly in the budget. And we hear folks talking and not talking about winners or losers, but this is it seems to me to be a club. And when did we provide, you know, state dollars directly to clubs? And that's a concern, because you then want to look inside the ideology of that club and wonder if our state tax dollars are being used to push certain ideology. It also just seems a little silly to me to have something that specific in the bill, and it seemed like there were many people who didn't know that it had been there. But to provide, what was it, $250,000?
$500,000 over the 2 years.
So $500,000 over 2 years to a club at a law school, and to not fund the Commission on Women, I think that's the bigger concern. It's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Certainly, we can all agree that the Commission on Women ought to be funded. You know, the Governor's Office of Minority Empowerment was not funded either. That's an important office, and it's not like we're looking for a lot of funds for it. But we still live in a society with racial bias, and that is an important office to try to combat that bias.
The other, sorry, Deb.
How much was the governor's office cut?
I need to look. It wasn't funded at the governor's office itself versus the. I know I have that here. It is $716,000 less each year, $1.4 million over 2 years.
One of the other bills that kind of got brought up today was House Bill 475. And it was for a constitutional amendment, so you wouldn't necessarily get a say in it, but it was an idea to change the Constitution so that local governments can set their own taxes, to remove the restrictions on local government taxes. Do you have any thoughts on that issue as a whole?
Well, my understanding is the debate that occurred on the floor today was a lot about the minority telling the majority they weren't yet ready to move on it, and that we got caught up in a lot of procedure. I believe that today was a good day on the House floor. You saw a lot of bipartisanship. You saw the Democrats and many of the Democrats in the House say, while this budget didn't do everything they wanted, they recognized it did do some good things. And that they wanted to come together to make sure the House is ready to negotiate with the Senate, and to do so strongly. And just because the next bill that was debated got a little heated, I think we ought to leave this Friday, because the budget is the biggest bill that comes through, saying we saw some really good bipartisanship today.
Well, Governor, I have a question along those lines, and I know it's Friday, and I know you want to go do another topic, but not to beat a dead horse, there were some in the majority who felt like this bill was targeted and torpedoed by the minority, who had co-sponsored the bill and then refused to vote on it when it got to the floor, as though they were making a point with this bill. And some question whether that kind of hurts the harmony that we've seen with even the budget.
I don't think those allegations are right or are appropriate in a day when just minutes before, Democrats in the minority came together to support the biggest bill that is there. That each and every one of them, I think, complimented those that put it together. You can't fall apart just the next minute. And so I hope everybody will take a deep breath over the weekend, realize that on the most important piece of legislation, people came together, and that they can restart talks on the other. We got to get to the point where on the floor over there or wherever we are, we're not calling each other names. We're not saying that somebody is weak. We got to be better than that. Even if we believe it at the time, even if we're all caught up in it, we've got to be bigger than that because, hey, Monday is another day, and they may have an opportunity on that bill or another bill, on Monday.
Speaking of bipartisanship, Wednesday, which feels like years ago, the Senate had the last day to file bills, and Senate President Stivers and Senate Majority Leader Thayer filed a couple of bills that appeared aimed toward the governor's office.
Appeared.
Did you have any thoughts on those bills in particular? I know one of them would limit your ability to set salaries from people who came from state governments. I mean, I think you've seen them. Do you have any thoughts on them?
I'm working hard to change the tone here in Frankfurt, and that requires us to put the partisan bickering aside and come together to find common ground and move forward. There's now been, out of a couple of legislators, 5, 6, 7 bills filed to limit the power of the governor. That's the type of partisan attacks that has been too common in the past that we have to move beyond. We all have important jobs in the separation of powers, and we can all do them a little better. We ought to stick with our own jobs and work as hard as we can on them. It's not productive. It's not helpful. And I believe that not only should those bills, not move forward, but we should commit as we move forward to being better and to doing better than that.
Time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, I think all 5, 6, 7 of those bills have come from the Senate. Do you think there's a reason that they're coming from the Senate?
Well, I believe it is just a couple of legislators, and that they've made the decision, at least in filing those couple bills, to return to some partisan attacks of the past. But my hope is, as the session goes on, both those legislators and the bodies themselves remember that this is our opportunity. This is our time to change the tone. And I believe even those legislators would say, it's a lot better environment to walk through the halls of this building right now. We ought to want to preserve that. We ought to want to continue to show the people of Kentucky that we can do better. And let me tell you, I'm traveling this state every day. People are hungry for it. In every part of the Commonwealth, they want us to stop this type of bickering, and the public out there does not support these attempts at either obstruction or tearing away powers of a governor. I think the people of Kentucky want to support their governor, and they want to support their legislature, but they don't want to see these types of antics. Anybody else?
You for daylight saving time?
I just saw that, and I want to think about that a little bit. I thought that that debate was done after Wendell Ford had been arguing it so strongly just about every day in the U.S. Congress. So we'll take a look at it. But sometimes you get a few surprises, and that was certainly a surprise. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Governor.
Didn't Wendell say the cows wouldn't survive?
Yes.
Yeah.